Okay.
Oh, we are rolling. Okay. So what I would like to do, I mean, you ask me anything, but there's so much going on right now.
Well, before we get there,
Yeah.
let me say to anybody who's interested, I love this guy, and that what Bob Reich has done, which not enough academics are doing, is actually try to talk about the issues that he's concerned with the whole world. I mean, using the media, writing books that people can understand. So, Bob, I just want to congratulate you very much.
Well, thank you.
I'm a big fan.
Thank you. And there are very few politicians around who do the same thing and who lead movements. In fact, is there anybody, this is actually a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer this. Is there anybody else who is leading the Democratic Party other than Bernie Sanders?
Now, that's a rhetorical question, so I'm not going to answer it.
But it does lead me into asking you a serious question. Immediately, over the next week, what do you think are the chances of the GrahamCassidy getting enacted? I mean, does John McCain's decision not to go along with the others really change the odds? I mean, what's your
Well,
what do you can be a better handicapper than I can.
Well, I'm not great into speculation. I think we're down to a few undecided votes. And this whole thing about whether 30 million people lose their health insurance comes down to Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and maybe some others who may be thinking hard on it. This is a terrible, terrible piece of legislation, and it really is deep, deep down incomprehensible to me that you have a leadership in this country that wants to throw 32 million people off of health insurance, make massive cuts in Medicaid, raise premiums for older workers, defund Planned Parenthood. How is this healthcare reform? Nothing to do with healthcare.
What is going on here? I mean, you just had an $80 billion increase in defense passed without any discussion that I heard. I mean, what is going on
I will
in
tell
the
you
Senate?
what's going on
in Congress?
I'll tell you what I think is going on. And then it's not only an $80 billion authorization, it's not an appropriation, but there is also a Trump tax plan, which the original plan would have given something like $3 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% over a 10-year period. So what are you seeing? What you're seeing is throwing millions of people off of health insurance and cutting back on Medicaid. Tax breaks for the rich and a huge increase in military spending. That is basically what the Republican agenda is all about, after everything is said and done. And our job clearly is to fight that every step of the way. And I want to say that, I've known John McCain for many years. And, we disagree on almost every issue out there. But John is a man of integrity. Don't forget that the McCain-Feingold bill, taking on big money in politics, that was John McCain, and certainly his personal heroism in Vietnam and all that stuff. So I just appreciate his decency and his willingness. And from his point of view, by the way, it wasn't even the bill. What John was saying is, how can you pass a bill of such magnitude without any hearings, what he calls regular order? How can you have it without any real debate? You know how much debate this bill will have on the floor? 2 minutes. Literally 2 minutes.
And no Congressional Budget Office.
No CBO.
Analysis.
Absolutely.
But let's peel back the onion a little bit. I mean, here we are. We're in my office. We can be frank. And you're always candid anyway.
But nobody is watching.
Nobody's watching. Well, there are a few dozen out there. So here's the question. This is the most regressive stuff I have witnessed in maybe the past 30, 40, possibly 50 years, maybe going back to Reagan. What is going on? I mean, where is the force coming from?
You got it. And that's the right question. And here's the very simple answer. And you've seen occasionally some media reports to this. What you are seeing now is Trump and his friends, Ryan, McConnell, beginning to implement the Koch brothers agenda. So you would think if you were a politician, and you were a politician, that if there's overwhelming opposition, the polls are incredible. Nobody wants to see this. More opposition to this legislation than there was to the Wall Street bailout. All right, that's how bad it is. Why are they pushing it? Because the Koch brothers have a view, along with their other billionaire friends, that we should basically end federal support for any and all programs. They would just as soon get rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Get rid of it. And this is the beginning in that direction. You hear Paul Ryan say, this is the first time we can actually roll back a federal universal health care program. That is what it's about. And mark my words, if they are successful on this one, they will go after Social Security, they will go after Medicare, already efforts to move to a privatization of the VA, privatization of the Postal Service. You name the federal agency, they want to eliminate it or privatize it or make substantial cutbacks. That's what this is about.
So you've got the Koch brothers and their friends, these multi-billionaires, their money is polluting beyond pollution. I mean, basically taking over American politics, despite the fact that with regard to this horrendous bill, this GrahamCassidy bill, you've got the medical establishment, the drug companies, everybody's against it. How do they get their power if the big corporations, and in some cases, I mean, you look at the military expansion, I understand military contractors want that, but you've got a lot of people concerned about, I mean, the deficit cutters, they're worried about it.
Oh, they used to be, excuse me, I beg to differ with you. That was yesterday, Bob. You haven't been paying attention. Deficit is no longer a problem. I don't hear anything about it. How can you talk?
So the deficit hawks
Gone.
are gone.
They're gone. I don't hear no discussion about that anymore. It's, it's all crap. It's, what they say is, this is what their agenda is. Their agenda is to give enormous tax breaks to the people who need it the least, and to create a society where people have no support in terms of programs that will protect them. And that's what these guys want to do.
But what I was getting at was a slightly different question, which is you've got in the highest reaches of corporate America, and even some Wall Street firms, you've got a realization that if we continue to go down this road, you're not going to have enough purchasing power in the country to keep the economy going. You're asking for social upheaval and unrest. Donald Trump is part of what you get when so many people are on a downward escalator. And there are, and I've talked to them, CEOs, corporate Republicans who say, this is bad. I am opposed to this. Why don't those voices have the same kind of power that the Koch brothers
Because I've
have?
not been hearing those voices. They may tell you in the confines of your office or as a friend. I don't hear them talking about it publicly. And that is one of the tragic moments, because I'm not here to tell you that every Republican in Congress or every CEO is some terrible, awful human being. I don't think they are. But I think they know where their bread is buttered, and they may tell you one thing quietly, and maybe they believe that. But certainly there has not been a willingness for them to stand up and say, hey, this is not good. Maybe good for short-term profits. It's not good long-term for the economy.
But how about even the Democratic Party, or even the Democrats? I don't want to put you into a difficult, awkward spot, but you've got a lot of Democratic senators who voted in favor of that military authorization. What's going on with them?
I would suggest you bring them here and ask them that question. But what I will tell you is what is astounding to me is there has been very, very little public debate. All right, the world has changed since the decline of the Soviet Union, right? Is it a safe world? God knows that it is not. How do we deal with international terrorism? How do you deal with North Korea? Et cetera, et cetera. These are really serious problems. But we are no longer facing a superpower with a massive level of nuclear weapons and a large standing army. The world has changed. Have we adopted to that change? I think perhaps not.
What I try to do with the 2.3 million followers we have on Facebook, thank you, by the way, for continuing to watch what we do here, is offer some upbeat assessment. That is, what can people out there do? It looks bleak. We have the worst president in certainly my memory, as long as I've been a sentient human being. I thought George W. Bush was the worst. I didn't like Ronald Reagan, but this is beyond belief.
Yes.
And we have an administration that is doing the opposite of what you're supposed to do when you faithfully execute the law. Every cabinet member I know of is actually repealing or trying not to execute the law. What can people out there do as just day to day.
Right.
We want change. We don't want this country to go down the toilet.
All right, let me begin by saying, obviously, I share your exact concerns about Trump and his administration. But I will tell you something else, which is really quite good news, is that on every major issue facing this country, the American people increasingly are moving in a progressive direction, and that cannot be overshadowed by the disastrous Trump administration. Let me give you examples. If you and I were here 5-6 years ago, and I said, Bob, I'm going to introduce legislation to raise the minimum wage, and I know as Secretary of Labor you were involved very heavily in that. If I'm going to introduce legislation to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour, you would have said, Bernie, that is really off the wall, right? I mean, why don't you start a little bit more modestly? Today, here on the West Coast, all over this country, more and more people understand, and legislation is being passed to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. My bill in the Senate now has 31 co-sponsors. How's that? And that is because working people have been out on the streets, people from McDonald's and Burger King, and they're saying, you know what, we can't make it on $8-9 an hour. We need a living wage. Real progress in that area. I'll give you another.
And Medicare for all. I mean,
Let's go.
Your Medicare for all bill. And I credit you, your campaign, and what you've done. Medicare for all was a pipe dream. Just a few years ago, before you ran for the nomination, everybody, people, I talk about it in Washington, and people would roll their eyes. They say, yes, we have to get there, but not in this generation, not while you're still alive. And you almost single-handedly made that a possibility. And then you introduced legislation, and you've got a huge number of co-sponsors.
16 co-sponsors.
And that, to me, is about social change and political change.
That is exactly my point.
Huge extent.
That's exactly what I'm talking about here. So you may want to be discouraged, but the last 3 public polls that came out in the last week, you know what they said? Majority of the American people want to move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program. My point, again, is we are making progress at the grassroots level of moving this country in a progressive direction. Another area, all right, you and I have talked about this in the past, and I know you are strongly believe that we can create a whole lot of jobs rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, right? You and I talked about this a few years ago, and I said, well, $1 trillion is what I think we need. Well, a lot of people in the Congress were saying that's too much, maybe $400 billion. Right now, that is the position of the Democratic Party. $1 trillion, we can create over 13 million decent paying jobs. Criminal justice reform, immigration reform. We are making real progress among the American people in moving this country in the direction of saying we need a government that represents all of us and not just the 1%. So I am not pessimistic. Obviously, the disaster in the White House is something that we have got to fight every single day. But we cannot just fight him and his outrageous reactionary agenda. We need a progressive agenda to bring people into the system, working people, young people, a vision for where this country can go. So that is the 2-pronged approach we need. Fight them every step of the way. No, we're not going to throw 800,000 young people out of this country because they weren't born here. No, we're not going to support your idea that climate change is a hoax. We're going to fight you tooth and nail. But on the other hand, we need a progressive agenda.
Okay, which gets me to the third big question I wanted to, or the topic I wanted to talk to you about. You've got America that is getting more and more progressive and accepting and actually mobilizing and energized and organizing for some of the things that we've just talked about, for Medicare for all, for a criminal justice system that actually works for Americans, for a system that makes equal protection and equal opportunity a reality, for free college education, for everything. But then you have simultaneously a political system that is dominated by big money more than ever before. I mean, in the 2016 election, for every dollar that labor unions and public interest groups and everybody who we would say has the public interest at heart spent, there were $64 that came in from corporations and the wealthy. $1 versus $64. So even though you've got this increasing upswing in progressivism among the people, how do you get a change in politics? How do you make America in 2018, starting in 2018 and then in 2020 and 2022, how do you get the political ball rolling when politics is so inundated with money? What does, what I want to ask you, what's the Bernie Sanders strategy on the inside? And then we can talk about what's the outside strategy.
Well, the inside strategy is to make it clear to the American people, and I think they already know it. And Bob, this is one where you can be a conservative, a moderate, or a progressive, and you understand that there's something a little bit crazy about Americans fighting and dying to protect American democracy, and now we're seeing a handful of billionaires controlling to a large degree the political process. Nobody thinks that that's a good idea, except the people who have the money. So you got to vote, I got to vote, and the Koch brothers got to vote, plus $300 million a year into the political process. So, clearly what we have to do is continue the effort, which is not going to be easy with this, Trump Supreme Court, to overturn Citizens United. Clearly we need to move to real campaign finance reform. In my view, we have to move to public funding of elections, okay, which says that if you show a certain amount of support, you're going to get public funding. I'm not going to outspend you 10 to 1 because I'm the incumbent or I'm a corporate-backed politician. And we're beginning to see movement around that all over the country. But you put your finger on what is the major crisis that we have, and that is it's a corrupt political system as a result of this disastrous campaign finance situation, and that has got to be changed. And the only antidote to it outside is that people have got to understand. And then let me add to that, is that your Republican efforts at voter suppression, right? So you have big money buying elections. You have Republican governors all over the country making it harder for poor people, people of color, older people to participate. That's their idea of democracy. Big money buying elections and working people unable to vote. And we need a full frontal attack on that, which means that we organize people at the grassroots level. One of the interesting things about what Jeremy Corbyn did in the UK a couple of months ago in their election, young people voted at a slightly higher percentage for the first time than the general population. He mobilized young people. So right now, poor people don't vote very much. Young people don't vote very much. We got to bring them in big time into the political process. We got to get working people involved. That's what we have to do.
Well, there is the crux of the dilemma. And I think we both agree to that dilemma. You've got voter suppression, gerrymandering, voter ID, big money in politics on the one hand. You've got a lot of people who are seeing that the system is rigged and corrupt on the other. There's people that see that the system is rigged and corrupt. Last time around, they followed for president an authoritarian populist who said, follow me, I'm going to shake everything up, but, oh, by the way, I'm going to blame them and them and them, and I'm going to find scapegoats, and I'm going to make this place very hateful.
Yes.
How do you avoid authoritarian populism? How do you get democratic, small d, populism?
Look, none of this stuff is easy, and certainly this is not a uniquely American phenomenon, right? We've seen it all over the world. Generally, the way it works is that when you have an agenda like the Trump agenda of throwing 30 million people off of health insurance and giving tax breaks to billionaires and denying the reality of climate change, and his friends wanting to cut Social Security, that's not quite an agenda you're going to campaign on, right? Hey, vote for me. I want to cut your Social Security and privatize Medicare, give tax breaks to billionaires. Very much appreciate your support. Ain't going to happen. So how do you win elections? It's the same old stuff. What you do is you divide people up. You play on the fear that exists, the desperation that people are feeling. So what you say to working people is, you know why your wages are going down? It's not because of what large multinational corporations are doing, sending your jobs there or that. It is because some strawberry picker in California, some guys are making $9 an hour. That's the reason. And your job is to hate that person. And you know why your kids are not going to college? It's because of it's because of the gay community. We're supposed to hate people who have a different sexual orientation than we do, and racism and sexism. So what demagogues always do is pick on minorities, Muslims, whatever it may be, to try to divide us up. And what our political approach has got to be, the exact antidote of that, is to bring people together. And there's no speech that I ever give which says that we have got to stand together, black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American, gay and straight, women, men. We got to stand together to take on this billionaire class. Don't let them divide us up. When they divide us up, we're going to lose.
But a lot of people don't realize, and I'm talking about the white working class, but I'm also talking about a lot of poor people who are not white working class. A lot of people don't realize that they are fighting over a smaller and smaller slice of a pie that is actually getting bigger, but most of the pie is going to a very tiny group of very powerful people who are using some of that wealth to pollute and corrupt politics. So how, this is not just messaging. I mean, a lot of people I talk with, I said, well, they see that we have this conversation. It's not, they're not Bernie Sanders, but there's a kind of analogous conversation. And then they get, if they're Democrats, they say, well, what's the message?
Right.
Let's have a message discussion. And I say to them, it's not about message. It's about framing the issue so people understand what's really happening. It's about giving people the motivation and the hope that they can join together and act on what they now understand. What's
Well, I agree with you. But I think also, when you look at the political landscape of America today, it is a little bit weird that the Democrats have kind of withdrawn almost completely from 25 states in the United States of America. So the message, I think, is right, but you got to get your hands dirty. You got to go into Oklahoma, and you got to go into Mississippi, and you got to go into Kansas and Indiana, and you got to go into those rural areas and say, you know what? Your kid can't afford to go to college, and the black kid in Cleveland can't afford to go to college. Don't you think maybe we should work together to make public colleges and universities tuition-free? Don't let them divide us up. But the Democrats, to a large degree, and this really galls me, have given up the dream of a 50-state party. How do you have a national party when you have no presence, or literal? I've been around the country, almost no presence in half the states in this country. And you got to go back into those states. You got to start from the ground on up. And you got to bring people together around a progressive agenda.
But will the Democrats do that? It's not just a 50-state agenda. It's also telling the truth about money and politics. It's about stopping the Democrats from doing what they've started. They've done since Tony Coelho was head of the Democratic campaign for the committee in Congress, and that is drink at the same trough as the Republicans in terms of money, big money.
Hey, Bob, I've spent the last number of years fighting exactly that, and that is the division in the Democratic Party. And I was very proud that when I ran for president, we received more small donations than any candidate in American political history. I didn't have a super PAC. And I think the lesson of that is if you are prepared to stand for something and take on Wall Street and the drug companies, the insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry, etc. You know what? People will say, yeah, here's $50, here's $10. I'm going to stand with you. And clearly, to my mind, that must be the future of the Democratic Party.
Will it be?
Okay, I'm working on it.
Okay, one last question, and I'll let you go. Inside versus outside. You are sort of, in some way, both an inside player and an outside player. I am certainly an outside player. I mean, I used to be on the inside, but I've been really on the outside.
He was a great Secretary of Labor.
But the question is, what is the best strategy for people like you on the inside who are working to fundamentally change the system? What's the best strategy for people like me on the outside who are also working for a democratic, small d, progressive agenda that has got to be the uniform agenda? It's the only way this country can move. It's not as if, oh yes, well, the Republicans over here, Democrats over here. No, we have got to move inevitably toward single payer. We've got to move inevitably toward a smaller military budget. We've got to move inevitably toward sane environmental, controlling climate change. We've got to move inevitably toward racial justice. And you and I both know these things. A lot of the people who are watching right now, we're preaching to the converted. How do we reach out beyond the converted? How can you on the inside, how can I on the outside get to people who are not there yet?
Well, the answer, first of all, I think, is to not only worry about national politics, but worry about local politics in your community and in your state. One of the results of my campaign, and it's a beautiful thing to see, we've got a lot of people, often young people, you know what they're doing? They're running for school board. They're running for city council. They're running for state legislature.
I know many of them.
Yeah, and we're picking up some great victories. Just the other day in Massachusetts, a young man named Paul Feeney won the primary, at least, for state senate in Massachusetts, and we strongly supported him. So you're seeing that all over the country. You know what? It makes a difference to have a good school board. It makes a hell of a lot of difference. Number two, I would speak now to the folks, not in California or Vermont or New York State, but to the people in Oklahoma and in Missouri and in traditionally or more recently conservative states. And that is stand up, fight back. My job is to get the Democratic Party to give you the resources that you need in Nebraska and elsewhere. There are a lot of very good people in those states, Bob, and they feel, literally, I remember I went to Utah to speak a few months ago, and people were crying. I said, why are you crying? And they said, nobody from Washington ever comes to Utah. They've given up on Utah. Well, I don't give up on Utah. I don't give up. I think the message that we have can and should resonate in every state in this country. Every state in this country is a working class state. I mean, here we're in, Northern California, and people can't afford housing, right? I mean, there are issues out there that will resonate all over this country if we have the guts to stand with working people, understand their needs, and then take on big money interests. So it is get involved locally. It is to those people in the 25 states where the Democratic Party has disappeared, reactivate, stand up, fight back. And some of us will be there for you.
And in 2018, we have got to take back at least one House of Congress. Is there any possibility of taking back the
Yes,
Senate?
absolutely. I mean, everything depends on how well Democrats figure out how to fight on these issues. But I would not like to be a Republican member of the House who cast the vote to throw 23 million people off of health insurance and give $500 billion in tax breaks to the top 2% in large multinational corporations. Man, that is not a position that I would like to defend.
Well, a lot of them are already on record for voting, particularly on those bills to get 23 million people off health.
That's what I'm saying.
They're there. I mean, we know who they are.
Of course we know who they are. And that's virtually the entire Republican Party in the House. And if Democrats can beat them on that issue alone, not to mention everything else out there, well, so I think, I think if Democrats get their act together, and mobilize people at the grassroots level to get involved in the political process, increase voter turnout, get young people involved, I think we can win at least one of the houses.
Well, I share your optimism. Every time somebody comes up to me and says, I don't care about the Democratic Party, I care about the country, I care about single payer, I care about free college education, I care about all of the things that you care about and I care about, but the Democratic Party, I don't have anything to do. I don't feel like they have anything to do.
I understand it. Hey, I'm the longest serving independent in the history of the Congress, so I get that point. But the other point is, if you care about those issues, it's not good enough to be spouting where the country is going to go without figuring out how we get there. I just made that point literally yesterday. I was at San Francisco City College. And as a result of progressive activism at the grassroots level, they have made that college tuition free. And you know what happened? For San Francisco residents, there has been a 51 increase in enrollment. The school is now bubbling over with excitement. Teachers have classes that are too large. That happens because of politics, right? So you can't say, I want a Medicare for all, but I'm not interested in politics. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You got to get involved at the grassroots level in politics.
When you came up with the free college education for those who need it, public university, free public university, a lot of people said, you can't do it, it is pie in the sky, and you can't afford it, for one thing. Now, the Senate just passed an authorization increasing the military budget by $80 billion, which would have paid for your entire...
More than paid for.
More than paid for your entire...
And would have helped reduce student debt, by the way.
Yeah. But they did it. I have not to this moment heard any conversation about that.
Welcome to the world of corporate media. You're right. When I proposed to make public colleges and universities tuition free, I think the number was about $70 billion a year. Oh my God, every newspaper in America, all my opponents, how is Sanders going to pay for that? And we did have a pay for, which was a tax on Wall Street speculation, as a matter of fact. But all kinds of discussion. He's outrageous. He's living pie in the sky. It's all this. $80 billion increase in authorization, not appropriation. Zero. Almost no discussion at all.
No, none.
So, all right.
I know you have to go, and you've been very very patient. And Jane Sanders, who I love, your partner in life, who is actually the spirit and basically the brains. Is that fair to say, Jane? I wanted to introduce you in a moment. Do you mind?
Okay.
But before I do, you just said corporate media. In this country right now, there is a huge danger. There are many dangers, but one of the largest dangers is we lose truth. That Donald Trump and the Trump administration and a lot of right-wingers are doing everything they can to reduce the public's confidence in the truth and to substitute genuinely propaganda, fake news, the kind of stuff we saw in the Weimar Republic under, young Adolf Hitler and then beyond. When we progressives, when we talk about the corporate media, are we playing into that?
That's a very good question. And the answer is, I wrote a book called Our Revolution, and the last chapter deals with media. What Trump is doing is saying that anybody who attacks him for any of the outrageous ideas or actions, this is fake news, this is a lie. It's not what I'm saying. There are a lot of good journalists out there, a lot of good newspapers out there every single day. There's incredibly good stuff out there. But I think what can be said is that for a variety of reasons, A, that media is owned by fewer and fewer large multinational corporations. What gets the emphasis? You just raised the issue. Who decided that there should be no vigorous debate about an $80 billion increase in authorization? Where did that come from?
For defense, yeah.
Right. You have not seen, Bob, unless you've got better TV here than I have in Vermont. When's the last time you've seen a program on television which says, how does it happen that the United States of America is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all, and yet we spend twice as much per capita on health care as the Canadians or anybody else? Don't you think it might be an interesting subject to discuss? Hasn't happened. Do you think that has something to do with tonight on television you're going to see a zillion ads from the pharmaceutical industry? Maybe. So my critique is, not that it's fake news, is the emphasis that the media gives to political gossip. Even Medicare for All, the success that we're having, more discussion of it. Who's supporting it? Why they're supporting it? Who's running for president? Rather than, why does it make sense? That's my critique.
Bernie Sanders, you are my hero. Thank you.
Mutual.
Come by at any time for office hours, live, here in my office. Jane, I really would like
let's get the brains
I
in the
want
back.
to introduce you.
How you doing?
I just want to say, this is Jane Sanders, and Jane, you are probably the most dynamic, and you have a depth of feeling and wit that I've never actually seen.
Oh, you're so sweet.
And you've been keeping this guy going. I mean, for a very long time. Thank you. I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you for being a fellow at the Sanders Institute and being such a leader there.
Well,
So-
it's your brainchild.
Well,
again.
I mean, yeah, but it's based on your work and his work and so many other people trying to create a vital democracy through, an informed electorate, which is what you do every week. It's amazing.
Well,
what
thank you.
do.
You are a great team. You
Thank
are
you.
the greatest team, and thank you for coming by.
Take care.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.